Welcome everyone to Monday equals MC squared. Good to see all of you. I'm just scanning and seeing your beautiful smiley faces. I know, I'm still wearing a sweater. What? It's May 17th and I'm still wearing a turtleneck sweater. But this is a very special sweater. And I told the beautiful person that sent it to me that I was going to wear it today, and it's perfect. It's not quite warm yet here, so it's a perfect weather for a sweater. And we will continue this month with the topic of grief and loss and much more. And I thought, it's important that we ground ourselves, but to really come back to the present moment. So why don't we start with that? Because I think the present moment gets missed pretty much every present moment, right? We're always thinking about what's next or what used to be. And particularly right now with so many places are starting to open up, not every country, Japan is starting to see the surge of more COVID cases as well. And then as many of you already know about what's going on in India and, even South America. And it's hard to really recognize that there's a lot of different present moment all over across the world. Not everybody's experiencing the same thing. But I think we have notion to want to go back to what it used to be. I want to go back to normal. I want to go back to what it used to be. I want to be able to go out to restaurants and movies like I used to. And we miss out on this present moment when we go down that road. So let's just feel into this moment as much as you can. And the question that I would love for you to ask yourself, if it's comfortable for you to close your eyes, is what does it feel like to you to be held in the present moment? By this presence of the present moment, what does that feel like to you to be held in that? So let's just take a moment and feel into what that is to you in your visceral you, in your gut, in your heart, down your legs, and even to your shoulders, your arms, your hands, your throat, your breath. Does it change how you breathe? Does it change when you are being held by the present moment? What does that feel like to you? Maybe there are some colors associated with it, shapes. The moment you start to go back to, what did I have for lunch? Or what am I going to have for dinner? Or what am I going to do tomorrow? Just gently come back to this present moment and be held by that. And whatever feelings and emotions start to bubble up, just let them just bubble up. You're just witnessing these. Much of our emotions will generally last about 90 seconds. No matter how deep you feel or how stressed out you feel, or you just feel like there's this huge load of anxiety on top of your head, that intensity will last about 90 seconds. So stay with it just a bit longer. Try not to multitask. Come back to this present moment for another 3 slow breaths on your own. slowly pressing your palms down towards your thighs, coming back a little bit more towards your body. Drop down into your breath and drop down into your body. And then slowly opening your eyes, coming into the space together as a group. And you know, the life has changed quite a bit in the last year or so. And at the same time, and you know, I want to acknowledge that this is about a year ago, the George Floyd was killed, just about a year ago. I believe it's May 24th. So in about a week or so, we will be looking at the shift, the changes that we've seen in this country, and the global scale protest, and this idea of, not idea, but the whole racism really came up to surface, that we were all demonstrating on the streets. Maybe you weren't on the streets, but you were very much aware of it. And so there have been so many changes in the COVID, obvious things. And at the same time, I can't help it but to feel like, oh my gosh, again, is what's going on with the Israel and Palestinian Israelis air raids that have been killing people in Gaza. Today, up to today, was 200 people, many of them children. And it just, I can't help it but to think that it's really, is this what it is to be back to normal? So, you know, I think it is important for us to distinguish that present moment isn't a repeat of what it used to be. And we have to grow from our grief and our challenges that we've gone through as collective in the last over a year. Not just, we didn't come this far just to say, let's go back to normal. Let's go back to what it used to be. And I think it's important that we look at not just the lotus flower itself, but look down and see where the lotus flowers come from. These flowers come from the muddiest water. They come from one of the most disgusting water. I don't know if you've ever seen the lotus ponds, but you can't see through it. And I think we have a tendency, all of us want to just look at the beautiful lotus flowers and from the distance and not go up and actually look where the lotus flowers came from. Because we got to get into the muddiness of it. We want to get into the darkness of it and really learn from this. Otherwise, we are just going to go back to quote unquote normal. And there's no growth from this. There's no post-traumatic growth. And Chris will talk about this a little bit more, but post-traumatic growth is different than just gone through it and we got through it and then we're back to normal. It's very different. There's a growth piece to this, that you get knocked down, but you don't ignore the mud. You don't ignore the dirtiness and the dirt and the messiness that the lotus flower comes from. And don't be, you know, I'm going to try not to be so quick to get to the lotus flower. That's what I'm working on, to stay just a bit longer, 90 seconds longer in that discomfort, so that I can really see the lotus flower for where it comes from. And I was listening to this Dharma talk this morning. It was done by Lama Rod Owens, and he's an African-American scholar as well, and an author, and also a teacher. But he said, if you aren't willing to get messy with complexity, you aren't ready for the responsibility of being free. If you aren't willing to get messy with complexity, you aren't ready for the responsibility of being free, nor are you ready to free others. And I thought, that's pretty powerful. If we're not willing to stay with it and not always look for solutions or ways to get out of this discomfort, and then we're just gonna create the same thing in a different package. So, I think that's what we are being called to do through these grieving practice, and really looking at your losses and losses as collective, and then stop just always coming up into the surface and say, I just want to look at the beautiful lotus flowers, 10,000 petals. So I'll pause there for a moment.
So
you and I did not talk about any of this before we got
I'm
on.
just thinking about
where hello,
to begin.
honey.
Where to begin? Yeah, good to see you. This topic of, I was just looking at what we put out there for today about the topic for the day about finding the inner resources through loss. I was just reminding myself, and this topic of post-traumatic resilience. It's kind of a technical term, but post-traumatic growth, I'm sorry, is something that's being spoken about a lot right now. And what's important to understand from that is that we have a tendency when we go through a hardship of some kind, or we go through a loss, whether it's a person or a relationship or some capacity that we once had, and in the face of that loss, we experience a kind of grieving, and we've spoken to some of that, more in the first couple of weeks of the month here. But getting toward this idea of the internal resources, this is where it gets tricky, because this is about some of the conscious decisions that we have to make about how are we going to be and who are we going to be in the face of this loss as we move through it. And so there's one school of thought that says we need to learn resilience, and that we need to support ourselves in ways that allow us to bounce back and to come back to how we were, reclaim what we used to be, and, reboot the old system, and just come back to how it was. And for a lot of people, that's what they, at least at first, feel like they want. And it seems very reasonable to want to get back to how things were. But eventually we can't overlook the fact of the loss. And again, in the face of the loss, we have to either ignore it, or we have to look at it and say, okay, what am I now? Who am I now with this big hole in my life that was once here? And so to go through that process of post-traumatic growth that comes from this, we have to dig deep, and we have to look at how we are handling the situation. And to talk about that a little bit more, I'm going to bring up a few words that start to get at this. So the first word is dealing. And dealing is an interesting word. It's something we use in English a lot. I'll deal with it. Often I'll deal with that later. But one thing that's interesting about how we talk about dealing is that it's often something that we have no choice about. We don't really, it's not a matter of acceptance. It's just what happened. So in dealing with something, it's simply responding to what has come up, and at first putting out the fires. And it's after that dealing stage that maybe it's the feeling of something being taken away from me that comes up. And the feeling of the loss starts to sharpen. And when that feeling of something being taken away from me is there, this is where we're at a crossroads. And we can either numb it and ignore that that happened, or we can surrender to the fact of it. And this idea of surrender is not giving up. It is, I would say it's more like it's opening up. It's giving up the idea that there's only one way. It's giving up the idea that I know best. And so the surrender is a very difficult one, because emotionally, I know for me, when I have experienced loss, um, particularly when I went through a very serious set of injuries, I was in complete denial about it. I wanted to take that other track of going back to how it was, returning to normal, resuming activities. I pushed myself physically and mentally to get back to how things were, and really just ended up hurting myself more. And it took me years to reach that point of surrender, because I was still dealing with it. I was just in that state of, I didn't ask for this, I didn't want this. And I felt like things were taken away from me. I felt like my physical body was taken away from me. I felt like aspects of my mind, my ability to think and remember things, had been taken away from me. And some of it improved. But over time, I had to reach a point of either burning myself up and using up all my energy and my inner resources. And I'm considering the energy of the body as one of our primary resources that we're talking about finding those inner resources. I had to surrender to the situation and say, this is bigger than me. I don't understand this. I don't know the answers. And that was at first very difficult. I mean, it really sent me into something of a downward spiral for a time. But in the course of doing that, it opens the door for asking questions about what's really here. What else is here that I wasn't seeing? Things like that. And by softening the edge of the loss, by surrendering to it, by opening to its reality, whatever it has to show us, that can lead to a third word, which is accepting or acceptance. So, an acceptance doesn't mean agreement, and it doesn't mean you like it. It's actually a very neutral state in many ways, is in my experience. The acceptance is saying, okay, this is what it is, and my fighting it isn't going to change that. So that brings us back to the circle of the post-traumatic growth. And so in my experience, what that entailed was, I had to decide that I wanted to move differently. And part of what that meant for me is that I couldn't simply do things the way I used to. And on a certain level, I had to be okay with that in the way that I just said about acceptance. It was, this is the way it is. It's not the way it used to be. It's like this now. And so from this new reality, I have to find out who I am all over again. And doing that took many years, and I'm still doing it. That's the amazing part of it, is in the aftermath of the losses, we're a new person. We're completely a new person. And so that means we have to know new things about this new person that we didn't know before. And for me, that involved learning things that I didn't know that I needed to know about my body, about health, about rebuilding my system. It led to me learning about things that I didn't know about relating to other people and being in relationship, and how that meant that I had to also give up some of my old ideas about control and self protection, to name a couple. And what is so interesting about the unfolding of this post traumatic phase is that it doesn't really stop. It's like the lotus that keeps blossoming out of the muddy water, like Masami mentioned. And I'll just say a couple last things about it. Um, One is that there is a there's a process of learning grace, and learning to, that's part of the acceptance, is the ability to be in grace, which is kind of a state of unknowing in many ways. It's back to those other things. It's past the dealing, it's past the surrender, and it's somewhere in the acceptance of what is, that there's also the ability to learn grace, which I think is a combination of a skill and a capacity. And they both can grow over time, the more time you spend in that way. So it's you know, many times the losses that we experience, for me, it was a physical and cognitive, neurological injury. And so the loss could at times leave me feeling maybe undignified, you know, like I'd lost some of my quality as a person. And so part of that process too was to practice. This might sound strange. I'm just working this out in words as I'm saying it, but it's that feeling of being, the feeling of experiencing indignity, of again, the loss of function, the loss of capacity, being unable to remember things, being unable to produce things the way I used to, whether it's in speech or just, you know, doing things in the world. That all changed after that series of injuries. So from that, there can very easily be a feeling of shame that comes with that loss too, especially if it's personal, or it could be even um, shame from the loss of a relationship that didn't go as hoped, something along those lines. But that feeling of the dignity going away from who I thought I was and how I presented myself to the world, um, it meant that I had to learn from that loss how to be dignified again. And that's the practice of being with the grace, is that you get to learn that all over and find out what it means to be whole as this new person, not as the one that used to be. So I'll pause with my comments there for now.
Amen to that, Chris. Thanks for that sharing. That was beautiful. And you know, I think this is, if you could look at where we're at today versus where we were at a year ago, and even further before back than that, we are growing. We've all grown, but the point is to make it more conscious, so you don't live on this earth just mindlessly. to become a little bit more conscious of the muddiness that we've gone through, and to appreciate where that nourished us and what we gained from that muddiness, of the messiness, of the traumas, collective traumas we've gone through, and individually. And I do believe that this is a great time for all of you to renew your commitment to who you are, what you'd like to see and maybe accomplish or do in your life in this present moment on, and looking at your goals and your potential, and just renew that connection with you. I think it's a very important time that you stop and say, what is the meaning? What is the meaningful thing that you can do for yourself today? And what is the most meaningful thing that will lead me towards the surrender that Chris talked about, to soften into that, to open up to it and land in that place of surrender, so you can be one with grace. It is important to pause and not just say, everything's opened up, everything is great, I'm going to move on. And I've been working with clients in the last couple of weeks that I've been noticing a theme where many of us are actually struggling to find new ways to work, or new ways to come into the world, or to express themselves in the world. It's challenging because what last year showed us was that, okay, what we used to do is not working. So I know I have to do things differently, but some of us didn't feel like it was enough to really sort it out. And then seems like the world just started opening up, and you're just like, okay, well, what do I do? Should I just go back to doing what I was? And there's this like a huge gap between what your heart desires, and then what the company is telling you to do, or what the world is asking of you, and then what you want to express, what your desire is. So I know the speed in which we open up is really, really fast. That's usually the case, isn't it? Like, think of the airports. Takes so long to go through the security and everything, and wait around at the gate, and takes a long time for you to get into the airplane. Everybody has to sit down, wait around. All these things has to happen before we can take off. And then once we land, and then that gate opens, and the aircraft, basically you can start to de-airplane or whatever, that's leave the airplane. It doesn't take long, does it? It's just like everybody's like, come on, let's go. All of a sudden, everybody wants to get out. So I feel like I'm getting pushed between the people in the front and the people in the back, and we're just like, okay, let's get out. But where am I going? I forgot my luggage, right? So see if you could just kind of sit with it. Come into a stillness. Be in the present moment. Renew your commitment. What was it that you fell in love with about yourself last year? What cracked your heart open last year? What did you decide last year in that stillness and silence and everybody in home? What did you make the commitment to do last year for yourself? It's time that you renew that, and you revisit that, and give it a little bit more sparkles. Don't rush out of that airplane. Let others go. You sit and say, oh no, go ahead. It's okay, I'm taking my time. Just you go ahead. If it's so urgent for you to get back to quote unquote normal, please go ahead. But I am going to take my time. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to be in the present moment. Renew before I completely get sucked into that waves. So I hope you can do that for yourself. And I think that's going to give us the post-traumatic growth, not just Okay, been there, done that, check it off. Okay, great. Can we get back to our sports, and can we get back to our busyness, and can we get back to no stillness? So I think that's going to help us get through the grieving process as well. And through grief and traumas, we can get to the post-traumatic growth. So this is a very fine tuning time, everyone. Don't rush through this, please. That's why we decided that we needed to spend 1 month talking about this topic. So I wanted to mention that. And there've been a lot of fabulous comments coming in. And while we have the attention, we wanted to actually announce that we've created a corporation called Breathe Inc. So breathing, like breathe, Inc. And we're very excited. It's been a while. We've been working on this. And of course, the IRS is like super slow. And, it took months for us to get the paperwork done and everything, but we're well on our way to having a company called Breathe Inc. So if you get information from us that says Breathe Inc., that's us. Okay. It's not a spam. So know that. And also we put it on our email too. And I thought, it's okay for us to share this, that, we don't want to just come on these Monday calls and talk about the weather, right? We really sit with it. And I hope you can feel that we, both of us sit with it. We research the topic. We want to dip deep into this viscerally, and just as a human being, but as a shared community, to explore this a lot deeper. So as you probably picked up, we're not superficial people. We don't like to just talk things on the icing level. We want to cut into the cake and really want to see the layers. So if it's possible for any of you that, it's not a mandatory to show up on this, please don't feel like that. But if you want to donate some money towards our work, that would be helpful. And then also we're creating a scholarship funds from it, so that when we do courses and things, we can support people that want to take the courses, but they can't afford it. We can allow these students to join these courses and make it possible. So if you could do that, we would really, really appreciate it. So I just wanted to mention that. And that link and everything, Chris might be able to put it up here too, but it's in the email that we sent out. So, okay. So let's shift gear. Do you want to read some of the comments, Chris?
Yeah, I wanted to back up from the bottom and what Cheryl said about striving in grace and surrender to choose and grow out of the muddiness. And then I liked the additional part in the parentheses: instead of just living in the muddiness, which I've grown far too comfortable with. And that's such an important perspective about living in the muddiness, because that's our natural tendency, is to have that sense of what was good, what was familiar, what was safe, stripped away, and then we're left with what feels like nothing, or who we are feels like it was taken, and we're left with this process of rebuilding. We have to find out who we are all over again, and that feels like a very dark and blurry and muddy time to do that. I was looking at some notes that I had that interestingly come up in this topic here, and it was more to do. I was helping to facilitate a program that was about death and dying, actually, recently, and I had some notes from that I had taken from other thinking that I was doing on the topic. But I had come across 3 layers of living that the mythologist Michael Meade described. And I thought it was good for this conversation, because he talks about the first one being the layer of appearances. And that's that superficial level. That's in many respects, that's how we prefer to interact with things, is just on that very appearance-based level. Not too much complication, not too much commitment. But then there's a layer below that, which is where our heart speaks and where kind of the, the soul of us gets its formation. And that's the layer that he calls abandonment and heartache. So abandonment and heartache is where we experience some of what I talked about, which is the loss of the capacity or the loss of relationship. And it could even be the just having your expectations disappointed. I think somebody, maybe it was Cheryl, you mentioned that earlier also about the, the loss of hope or the shame around losing hope. So it could be that sense of disappointment with the expectations you've once held or set for yourself. And it could even be the feeling of being trapped or left alone to fend for yourself. So these are kind of those. We're getting down now into the level of archetypes. These psychological formations, these structures in our psyche that help us to make meaning out of what's going on in our lives. So that's what I see the second layer to be. And then the third layer, and this is also getting to our topic today, is Michael Mead again. He described this as connecting with the underlying unity of being. So whatever that is for us, however we describe that, some might call it God or consciousness or the ground of being, or, however we connect with that in our lives, that's also at play as the deepest of the three layers of our living. And when we're tapping into that one, I think Masami was giving us some indication of that with what she just said, but it's that experience of having a feeling of universal love. So when you're able to crack through the shell of your own personal experience and see nature around you, see the sun shining and everything growing, especially here in the Northern Hemisphere where spring is popping back into life, it's a little bit easier to connect with that feeling and understanding. But it's also being able to operate from a place of forgiveness and not just, I'm sorry, I forgive you. But truly the forgiveness is if you look at that word, it's actually to give before. So you're almost offering the gift to somebody before they could even ask for it. And that's the energy of forgiveness, is that you're putting yourself out in front and opening up. And with that also comes reconciliation. And I think we're not only in that on an internal level, but we're in that reconciliation on a global and social level across cultures. And it's a huge moment of that right now. So we're in the midst of it. And so coming back to how these layers get stirred up in us and how we relate to our existence and life and meaning from these very contrasting places can really create more muddiness. In fact, that's often where the muddiness itself comes from, is the interaction of these layers of our living. It just gets confusing. So when we're talking about finding inner resources, this is one aspect of it, is to understand the ways that we tick, the ways that we operate as a human being, and feeling deeply into that. And so it includes our bodily experiences. It includes coming back to our home place of our body and taking care of it and prioritizing that every day. To do this, the uncelebrated small work, which is monumental over the course of our lives, of just taking care of ourselves. And so coming back to that is something that we've really seen in the last year of or so of being shut down and closed away from others, is how essential the self-care is to get back out into the world again and not just be starting up with things in the same old way. But no, how can we grow from this and sustain our learning and sustain our ability to be out there? So I'm gonna let Masami come in again there.
I think the muddy part, it's good to be in it and then to name it too. Not to just be stuck in it, but you want to name what that muddiness is. What does it feel like? What does it do to you? Does it make you heavy? Does it make you, feeling stuck? Or does it make you feel anxious? I'm gonna have to get water.
So I'll keep talking then. Yeah. So coming back to how you're feeling, this is where our ability to be still is one of our resources, and it's one of our most overlooked resources. It seems like I don't know if I'm the only one that thinks this way. I hope I'm not. I might be. I don't think I am though. But it seems like we tend to overlook the low hanging fruit. Let me put it that way. These things that are right there for us, they're built into us. And yet they're almost so easy that we just don't think they can have much value because they're ubiquitous. Things like breathing and things like sitting quietly with your eyes closed, like Masami introduced at the beginning, just sitting for 90 seconds and feeling whatever you feel is a powerful way for you to develop your inner resources. We had an experience just a few weeks ago. We took a couple of days off, and it was really not enough time off because we've been working nonstop for months. But we took a few days off, and we spent part of that time. We went to one of the hot springs in southern Colorado. That's right on the I think it's the San Juan River. And so part of our routine there is we would soak in the hottest of the pools and then go and get into the ice melt river, the snow melt river, and go through these, thermal, what's that called? The therapeutic, I forget what it's called.
Thermogenesis.
Thermogenesis.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting is it reminded me of what it feels like to deal with painful situations, because in one of these experiences you're going into extremely hot water that's almost too painful to be in at first. And so you have a couple of options. You can either go straight in and just deal with it until your body adjusts, or you can ease yourself in. But as you're easing yourself in, it's easier and easier to imagine that you can't do it because you're feeling that heat at each layer of your skin that drops down as you're inching your way down. And so you can actually work against yourself by doing that. But then when we would go into the river, and it was very striking because the first day we were there, it was a little bit warmer and the river was around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still really cold, but it was tolerable. And we could go into it and go underwater in it and stay in it for a few minutes, even though it was painfully cold. But then the next day, there'd been a lot of snow melt overnight, and in the morning we went into the river again, and it was so cold, like just around freezing, that it was mind numbing. I mean, it was literally mind-numbingly cold. And when I went in, I knew my eyes got big and my breathing slowed way down. And I just thought, should I even be doing this? Is this safe? And it's that kind of feeling that we get when we let ourselves feel. So when we're facing losses that we've experienced in our lives, we can feel the armor coming up and pushing back on that, and it's like dipping your toe in the water and going, nope, Not for me, not today. So part of developing the post-traumatic growth and that inner resource is to commit and sit with it. And even if you set your timer for 90 seconds, and that 90 seconds isn't a random number. This is something that Masami was just telling me about the other day. And she brought it up at the beginning, but it's the amount of time that our brain takes to process the signal. So if we allow ourselves that 90 seconds of feeling, we not only get to experience the fullness of that before it passes, but we also get to open ourselves for future feeling. We get to open the door for more and to be able to tolerate more, even if it's heartache, even if it's the sadness.
Well, and I'm going to mention about the brain, if you don't mind. I'm coming back to naming. So you want to name your mud. You want to name your messiness. You want to name where you're stuck. So Cheryl said you feel stuck, stagnant. The mud feels like that. That's fine. You got to name these things because your left brain is looking for language to translate that sensation into. So if you just get stuck in a sensation, okay, or feelings, then you don't really go into the next stage, which is translating into the language that you can do something with. Because if you feel stuck, okay, opposite of stuck is what? Not just unstuck, but what would that be, Cheryl? Right? Open, right? Crack open. You may free, exactly. So then you can start to language it in your body. And that's how we work as a body and as a being, is that you don't want to just get stuck in the visualization. So if you're always doing meditation, that's all visualization, all colors and all shapes, that's not going to necessarily take you to the next stage either. But if you're just only doing the morning writing and you're not feeling it in your body, you can't go beyond either. So it's this coming together, okay, that what you experienced, the grief we've all experienced, was experienced by the whole of you, all of you. So you got to bring the language, the sensations, the feelings, the colors, the shapes, do as much as you can to come back, to drop into who you are and name it in order to move out. Okay, that's very, very important that you do that. And that could be the writing that you can do. So, Sharon asked that, how do we do the continued self-care while moving back out into the world? Those are some of the things you can do. But another thing you can do for self-care is like renew your goals. Renew, what is it that you were going to do in 2019 in December, okay, or January of 2020? What were you going to do that year? And what was your, main focus? And then things shut down. Then what happened? So retrace it back. Don't just cross off. So many people are writing articles about, oh, last year was just, something to like cross off or something to eliminate or never to visit again. It's like, are you kidding me? It was nothing but gemstones underneath that mud. So remove the mud, find the gems. Okay, that's one. And I agree with you, Teresa, and many of you, I think you do too. And, I have not public come out and said this, but in my private sessions, I've been slowly sharing this. But yeah, I have to say, I'm somewhat grieving this re-entry that is happening. It's too fast for me. I'm just feeling, like I said, I'm the one that I'm going to say, no, you go ahead. You disembark. That's the word. You disembark the airplane. I'm going to sit back. I just need to take my time with this because my luggage is like 3 rows back and I got to wait till everybody leaves so I can get my stuff. And I think that's okay that you're grieving about it, that you feel a little bit like, oh, wow, it's already opening up. Because I think many of us that will gather in sessions like this have felt a sense of healing and silence that you needed, that you craved for decades, came to fruition last year. in a totally unexpected situations. Okay. And I'm sorry, there are times I was like, I hope this will continue on. Like I was listening to Japanese news, and this made me smile and laugh at the same time. 60+% of Japanese population, Japanese people, have voted against the Olympics this year. And it's the government that's pushing it. Okay, the citizens of Japan are like, no, we don't want a bunch of people coming into this country right now. We're just trying to, figure this out. The vaccine's not rolling out really well, I guess, over there. And there's all kinds of chaos. They're like, what? Olympics? Are you kidding me? We don't want Olympics. They're like, just scratch it off. Just don't even try to do it following year. None of those things. Just cross that off. No Olympics. That's what they're saying. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Where's that coming from? I think it's coming from people like me and some of you, or many of you, that are like, it was what I needed. This is what I've been asking for every Christmas. And I finally got it, is what I felt. Okay. Despite and in spite of all that happened, there's so much personal growth that happened in all of us, and we needed it. So especially people who are intuitive, especially people who work in, the empaths and pick up things and energetically. And for God's sake, people that have been in first responders and doctors and nurses, they could use a little break instead of getting back into it right away. So encourage that, talk with each other. It's okay. It's not a taboo to say that. Okay. Has nothing to do with me wishing for COVID to continue. That's not it. It's just, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to go outside my home. And I really like my sweatpants that I'm wearing right now. So, joking aside, really, it's okay, everyone. All right.
I wanted to say that this situation reminds me of what happened. Masami and I had a regular time, couple times a year, that we would go on a retreat, often separate from each other, down in this, it used to be a Carmelite hermitage in southern Colorado, this beautiful place in the high desert. And it was this feeling of how much it took to settle into that silence. The first phase of it was the landing in the retreat space. So I'm making this analogy to the past year, where at the beginning it was an adjustment to how to be in this new way. So in the retreat, we're tuning into how to be still and how to be quiet and how to really pay attention to what the needs of our body are and how to pay attention to what life is asking from us right now. And to do that, you have to become very still, very silent, and like a still pond. I mean, you just really, really get quiet, and then things start to flow in their own way. And then the retreat has a life of its own, and eventually, like all things, it comes to an end. And then after the retreat has ended and we would be coming back, there's this combination of a feeling of loss, of wishing it was still there and still happening. And there's particularly one point on the drive back. It was about a 3.5-hour drive from where we live. And there's a point where both energetically and physically, you could feel the return to the urban world. And it was coming over one particular hill in the foothills, where you then saw the whole vista of the city before you. And it was almost like just getting hit with a wave of noise and electromagnetic energy and everything else. And it was very unsettling. But then that's still it. That's still our life. We still have to navigate that. And this is the analogy to the inner resources. In the quiet time, we're cultivating more space within us. We're carving out more. We're coming to terms with what we've lost and what we've learned. And that gives us more tools to work with when we come back. So that feeling was always there. It never really went away. There was always a something of a dread to return. But then it was also a feeling of, well, if I'm not learning how to live in this, what am I doing it for? The retreat isn't for its own sake. It's to learn how to live with the rest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what we're doing, aren't we? We're slowly driving back to the city. And, I think it will be helpful. And then maybe you could put it in the chat. I think I love what Mary Bosse said too here. But coming back to the name your resources, name your refuge. So this was about couple of years ago. I did a thing on a refuge, finding your refuge. And I don't know if that's already, maybe we removed it from our website, but it's to find your inner sanctuary, but it's also to name what your refuge is. And so, for instance, you want to go back to even your childhood and figure out what was your refuge. And I remember my refuge was this giant tree, oak tree. And then I had this I call it Tarzan swing kind of thing, but it's like a one straight rope. And then there's like a wood, and then you hop on it. And I would just swing and then wrap around the tree and kick it off and then come back in. I'll do that over and over. And I got it so perfectly that I could close my eyes and do it around and around. I mean, for a long, long time, I'm talking like I could continue to do that for an hour because it was just like a rhythm, right? That was a refuge for me. I also loved coming home from school and climbing up to the top of the shed roof. And I would just lie down on the shed roof and I would just look up into the clouds. And that was really helpful for me. So think of things that you used to do that just naturally you gravitated towards that helped you to find your inner resources, to get out of that mud so you can nourish yourself and become the lotus flowers. But that refuge is always with you, that inner refuge. And there could be many, many things. So you want to ask yourself, what fed you as a child? Who fed you could work too. But what fed your heart? What fed your spirit? And what helped you with your intuition? What abilities or what skills did you pick up along the way to bounce back, right? So go befriend yourself again to that little girl, little boy, and say, okay, what helped you the most? Because this is like a Buddhist saying, but we say 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. That's it. Our lives are 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, and just repeats itself, right? So we can't stand here and avoid sorrows. It's going to happen. But the inner refuge you've been building up since you're a little kid, and you have the tools you need to get through this. Even this reintegration phase that we're in, the many of us are in. And some people seem to not have to go through the reintegration phase, but I certainly need to go through it. And it's not fun for me right now to have to totally go towards opening up. But I have the inner refuge to tap into. And oftentimes it's nature for me. Sit by a tree, garden. I've been loving weeding my garden. I love weeding. So it's just mindless weeding. I just, and I get to know the plants every year. So it's like, oh, you're a flower. I'm not going to pick you. Or, oh, I cannot have you taking over this section. And, I'll just be having all these conversations. That's such a beautiful way to replenish my spirit and my soul. So find ways. That's the self-care that you need to do. Don't jump into opening up. Reintegration process is going to take time. Don't disembark your airplane too quickly. Yeah.
One last thing I'd like to add is that you probably won't find your inner resources in passive entertainment. And by that, I mean watching TV or surfing the internet or Facebook. Um, if you need science to back me up on that, it's out there. There are studies that show this actually makes us more unhappy and more depressed to do things like this. So do things like what Masami was saying that are active, that get you out of your habitual shape. Let me put it that way. Moving is really important. I also spent 5 hours on Saturday just pulling weeds and reorganizing our wildflower garden. I'm feeling it still, but it was 5 timeless hours that went by, and it was absolutely what I needed, because this past week for me was actually one of a lot of emotional upset, and I was really, really feeling it. And being able to literally get my hands in the dirt and interact with nature, just be quiet within myself, that stillness is never not going to be there. That is one of your main resources that you always can count on. And it's through that stillness and the silence that you can always tap into inside of you that you can also access that bigger layer that we talked about, that ground of being layer, the connection to everything layer. And so one last question for everyone just to chew on. I'm not going to provide an answer for this because I don't know what it is for you. But I would challenge you to think about, what have you learned to do? Maybe there's been loss this year, but what have you learned to do that you wouldn't have learned to do if not for that experience?
Well, I think we've all learned how to show up on Zoom. That's for sure. That's a start. And I think, yes, please come up with your inner refuge, okay, inner resources, and we can share that next week. Just, I would love to hear what you do to help yourself in times of sorrows, because we will have 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, right? And Mary Basse asked me an interesting question. She's like, so at one point you were actually comfortable with heights. Yes, I was. I loved climbing things, trees, rooftops, everything. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And when I stopped and I became really fearful of heights is when my parents told me that I was going to be moving to the United States. And all of a sudden, almost like an overnight, I couldn't get on the high places without tremendous fear and terror. So still working on it. That's a very deep subconscious thing for me. I'm still nervous about it. But yes, I loved heights at one point. So yeah, thank you, everyone. So glad I tuned in. I'm not liking opening up either. Too soon, too fast. Yes. So take your time. Take your time. Tap into your inner resources.
So Cheryl just said, jump like you mean it, from your story that you shared last week. And you actually had a little addendum to that you wanted to say.
Yeah, so that little girl, so that happened only about a couple of years ago. Okay, so this 10-year-old's telling me, jump like you mean it. And I'm telling you, my life changed from that point forward, because I realized that I wasn't jumping like I meant it. Not just on trampoline, but in my life. And I was really nervous to put myself out there like I am doing right now, right? But later on, I found out, I told my brother about this story, and he goes, oh, he said, she is one of my favorite people on this earth, he said, this little 10-year-old. And he said, did you know that she was born with a heart condition, and she's been hospitalized pretty much off and on her entire life? And And then when I heard that, and he sent me the pictures of her in the hospital and things like that. And he said, yeah, she's in and out of the hospitals constantly. So for her to say, and she didn't say a word about that. She's like, no, jump like you mean it. That's all she cared about in that moment. So, you know, we can do this. Okay. If she can do it, we can do this. I think it's also important to remember that. Look around the people that have really done it. Look around the people that have gone into complete disaster and lost everything, and they're still jumping like they mean it. So we can all come out of that mud, but name it, get to know it, and then, you know, find the inner refuge in you that's been resourced to you since you were born. Everybody's equipped to get through our lives of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. We're all equipped to do this. Yeah. So that's all I have. Is that it? Did we read everything we needed to? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, everyone. And we will see all of you next week. And Chris, you need to say anything? Are you good?
I think I'm good for this week. Maybe I'll have something wise to say next week, but for now, thank you all for showing up and being here with us today.
Yeah, much love to all of you. So let's disembark from this airplane together a little slowly, okay? Let's let the others that feel like they can go off sooner, okay? All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.